All right, the time is 11 a.m. Eastern. I think we'll move forward, go ahead and get started. As we prepare for our webinar, thanks to each of you for taking the time to participate in the webinar today. My name is Lenny Mansell, and I'm your host. Our webinar presenter is Mark Simon. Mark Simon has been a NERC compliance specialist at Encari since 2008. Prior to joining Encari, Mark was a practicing attorney in Chicago, Illinois, and adjunct faculty member at DePaul University's College of Computing and Digital Media. At DePaul, he taught a graduate course on legal aspects of information assurance and an undergraduate course on incident response planning and response. Mark holds certifications as a CISSP from 2008 and GICSP from 2013. He obtained a Master of Computer Science and Juris Doctor from DePaul University and a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from the University of Illinois, Urbana. In May 2014, Mark participated in a 5-day training program provided by US ICS CERT at its facilities at the National SCADA Test Bed hosted by Idaho National Laboratories in Idaho Falls. This program, which is available to asset owners involved in the BES, involved hands-on training in incident response, including a red team, blue team exercise that takes place within an actual control systems environment. Mark has been a speaker at the RSA conference and has authored articles published in the ISSA Journal in February and March of 2008 based on the work he performed in collaboration with Microsoft's Trustworthy Computing Group. Mark is a former chair of the Chicago Bar Association's Computer Law Committee. There are 3 administrative items I'd like to briefly cover. If you have a question that you'd like to have addressed while the webinar is underway, please type the question and send it to me using the questions feature within the GoToWebinar interface. If we're unable to address your question during the webinar, we will make sure to respond to the question soon thereafter. You may need to transition to full screen mode within the webinar interface in order to see the entire content of the slides that will be presented. And the presentation materials will be made available to you in the near future. We will notify each of you via email where you may download a copy of the presentation materials and transcribed questions and answers that were raised during the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark Simon. Thank you, Mark, for speaking to us today about transient cyber assets and removable media.
I'm going to be addressing SIP 010-2, or a requirement 4 regarding transient cyber assets and removable media. There was recently a ballot on SIP 10-2. The ballot passed, and it was not a final ballot. It was a additional or successive ballot. So the next step for NERC is to have a final ballot on SIP 10-2. So things are looking good right now. I believe there is still the chance that there may be some changes to SIP 10 requirement 4 based on comments that the standard drafting team might have received in connection with the successive ballot. So I'm not exactly certain about that. To find out more about the information, we're going to make this slide presentation available to everybody, and at the bottom of slide 4 here we have a link to the project page for the SIP version 5 revisions, including SIP 10 requirement 4. So what's precipitated a change regarding transient cyber assets was FERC was not comfortable with the exclusion from the definition of BES cyber assets for transient cyber assets. So they asked NERC to develop new or modified standards to address risks posed specifically by transient cyber assets and removable media. And the definition of a BES cyber asset is going to change. It's no longer going to refer to the exclusion for transient cyber assets that are connected less than 30 calendar days. So what we're looking at in the black typeface is what the new definition will be. What's in the red typeface with the line through it is what's been removed from the definition. The new definition of a transient cyber asset is what now appears on slide 7. It's to read it to you, it's a cyber asset directly connected for 30 calendar days or less, capable of transmitting executable code to either a BES cyber asset, a network within an ESP, or a protected cyber asset. Now, what's a little perplexing is what does it mean if we have a cyber asset that's connected, let's say, to a network within an ESP for less than 30 days, but for some reason, either a software or hardware interface, the entity can establish that that cyber asset is not capable of transmitting executable code. Where does that leave the cyber asset? How should it be categorized? And I don't have an answer for that, but hopefully that may be something that could be addressed later in the future, either by NERC or FERC during the comment period for finalization of this new requirement. Examples of transient cyber assets that most responsible entities will typically run into is listed in here on slide 8. And similar to the point I raised about the definition of a transient cyber asset, removable media is also subject to the condition that it be capable of transmitting executable code. So if it's not capable of transmitting executable code, the question is, what is the status of that removable media? And again, I don't have an answer for that question. The key to SIP 10 pertains to requirements for transient cyber assets and removable media is that both of them have to be covered by some sort of security plan that will address the use of these kinds of devices. And the planned elements for a transient cyber asset and removable media would be found in attachment transient cyber assets and removable media would be found in attachment 2 to SIP 10-2. The compliance date for this new requirement would be 9 calendar months after the effective date of the standard itself. One would expect well, it's hard to say when the actual enforcement date will be, but certainly one would not expect it to be before April 1, 2016, when the requirements for SIP 5 kick into gear for high and medium impact BES facilities or BES cyber systems. Which brings up another issue, and that is this requirement only applies to high and medium impact BES cyber systems. So it would be transient cyber assets and removable media used for high and medium impact BES cyber systems. So now what we're getting into here in slide 12 is an example of a requirement or a required element of what should be in the Transient Cyber Asset Security Plan. And the element 1.1 addresses Transient Cyber Asset Management. And what 1.1 addresses is exactly when would you apply the security controls for a transient cyber asset. Is it something that you do on an ongoing basis? Is it something that you only address when you just immediately prior to connection to a network within an ESP or a BES cyber asset or some other protected asset? Or would it be a combination of both? And the attachment 1 describes the ability of a responsible entity to choose whatever works. It could choose to have the transient cyber asset protected at all times in an ongoing manner. It could choose to address security controls just prior to connection, or it can use some sort of combination. The point is that some thought has to be given and a plan must be established, a written plan that would address how that transient cyber asset is supposed to be managed. Examples of evidence for element 1.1, which we've been discussing, are provided in attachment 2, and that's what slide 13 reflects. Examples of evidence. Moving on, the next topic that's addressed is transient cyber asset authorization. That can be interestingly done for groups or individuals, and that's to facilitate the authorization process and minimize the separate level of documentation that might be required for a transient cyber asset. So for example, you might have a plan that says any authorized users of BES cyber assets are authorized to use transient cyber assets. So you can have that statement and as part of your plan and not have to individually identify all the persons who can access the transient cyber asset. There's a general caution for using transient cyber assets when they're not in use, or when they are being used. It's important to be aware of what communication features are enabled for that cyber asset, whether it's wireless or Bluetooth or anything else. And the point being, you don't want to convert that transient cyber asset into an electronic access point to your network within an ESP. Element 1.2, examples of evidence for 1.2. Again, this is coming from attachment 2 to SIP 10-2, and that's what slide 16 is listing, examples of evidence for element 1.2. The documentation must identify the transient cyber asset individually or by group of transient cyber assets along with the authorized users, either individually or by group, and the authorized locations, either individually or by group, and the authorized uses of that transient cyber asset. So there's obviously a lot of flexibility here that's intended to be permitted by NERC in giving responsible entities the necessary flexibility for managing their transient cyber assets. Security vulnerability mitigation, one or more of the following methods can be used that are listed here in slide 17. And although there's obviously discretion here for the responsible entity, patching is always advisable, and to not patch a transient cyber asset would generally not be an advisable security position or posture to take. So we, at least from Encari's perspective, we would encourage security patching to be current and to be properly monitored, just as you would a BES cyber asset, and that these other controls be considered in addition to patching. Again, examples of evidence for element 1.3, which we were just looking at. This is coming from attachment 2 to SIP10, and the idea of providing examples of evidence is to facilitate the creation of the security plans that are required to address transient cyber assets and removable media. The introduction of malicious code is certainly a big issue for managing your transient cyber assets. Again, there's quite a few methods that can be used. Antivirus software, of course, is highly recommended. In addition to that, there'd be other tools such as whitelisting and restricted communications and other methods that a responsible entity might identify. So these are similar security measures that are applied to BES cyber assets, but they're not exactly the same. There's certainly some overlap, but the idea is the transient cyber assets can be dealt with as a group. That there's some flexibility in how they're managed, and that notwithstanding that flexibility, there's still sufficient security being applied so that the BES cyber system's not at risk when there's a connection between a direct connection between the transient cyber asset and the network within the ESP. Again, slide 20 is a list of, or is a description of evidence that could help satisfy the protection for malicious code, introduction of malicious code. This again is coming from attachment 2. So in attachment 1, we have the elements, and in attachment 2, we have examples of evidence of how you can comply with each element. Risk of unauthorized use is element 1.5. There's full disk encryption, multi-factor authentication, there's physical security, there's recovery, theft recovery tools. These are all things that can help help an entity minimize the risk of unauthorized use. And depending on the kind of cyber asset you're looking at, you'll choose an appropriate security measure from the menu that's provided in 1.5. The slide 22 that we're now looking at is examples of evidence of how we might go about complying with element 1.5 regarding unauthorized use. And again, this is coming from attachment 2. Security vulnerability mitigation, this is element 2.1 in attachment 1. We again get an option to use one or more of a number of methods that can be inserted into a security plan for your transient cyber assets. Here we're looking at a review of installed security patches, where you may be relying on the patching process used by a vendor or contractor, vulnerability mitigation performed by a vendor or contractor, or other methods that might mitigate security vulnerabilities. Obviously, this particular section 2.1 has a different perspective than our elements in section 1, where the perspective was cyber assets owned by the responsible entity and under the control of the responsible entity. Now here in section 2, we're focusing on how to, what kind of security controls are appropriate for transient cyber assets that are owned and operated by vendors or contractors. Again, in attachment 2, we're provided with some examples of how you can go about ensuring that vendors or contractors are implementing the requirements from element 2.1, 2.1 being security vulnerability mitigation. Malicious code mitigation is another concern when vendors or contractors may be permitted to connect their transient cyber asset to a network within an ESP or a BES cyber asset. There's a variety of methods that can be used for malicious code mitigation, and in order to require vendors or contractors to meet these requirements, they ought to go into the service agreement. They ought to go into the contract with that vendor or contractor right from the beginning, so there's a mutual understanding of the specific security measures that are required. It's hard after the fact to impose security measures on a vendor or contractor, but it's not impossible, because vendors and contractors are ordinarily interested in making their customers happy and encouraging additional or repeat business or renewed business. So even if you haven't had a chance to have a robust security plan developed for that vendor or contractor, there's no reason why you couldn't pitch an amendment to your agreement that would provide for these very specific security measures. Now, the enforcement of SIP 10 requirement 4 is somewhat down the road, so we all have a heads up. We need to work with our purchasing department and other people who are thinking about renewing contracts with our vendors or contractors, and start thinking about how we're going to insert these requirements into our contracts and agreements with them. So even though the effective date or enforcement date of SIP 10 R4 isn't down, is not in the near future, it'll be some time from now, there's good reason to start developing your plans as quickly as possible, so that you can insert these provisions in advance with your vendors and contractors, so that when the enforcement date rolls around, you're all set up. They're required to adhere to the requirements. Examples of evidence of compliance for element 2.2 are reflected in slide 26. Again, this is coming from attachment 2 in SIP 10. And just element 2.3 is a catch-all. A responsible entity should determine through some sort of risk analysis, and from my point of view or Encari's point of view, whether any additional mitigation actions are necessary. So we've got 2.1 and 2.2 that are a minimum, and 2.3 invites responsible entities to take a close look at the nature of vendor contractor access and how they're connecting transient cyber assets, look at those risks and identify what other security measures would be appropriate for those temporary connections. Examples of evidence for that might be consistent with element 2.3 would include requirements for the vendor to have to apply their change management system to their transient cyber assets, their policies for using electronic mail, because electronic mail is a very serious threat, could be a serious threat to a cyber asset, and that's an excellent topic to be concerned about if a transient cyber asset has electronic mail as well as other applications that that could interject malicious code into your BES cyber system. All right, so we've been talking about transient cyber assets, and now we're moving on to removable media. So we're talking about two separate plans. Transient cyber assets are considered to be different than removable media. Removable media, from the drafting team's perspective, is not considered to be a cyber asset, whereas a transient cyber asset is considered a cyber asset. So that's one reason to have different security plans. The use of these two different types of pieces of hardware warrant different security measures, and of course removable media being less sophisticated than a transient cyber asset like a laptop or that might be connected to your system on a temporary basis. Removable media authorization, who can use them, where can they be used, and what can they be used with. Those should be addressed in your removable media security plan. Examples are again coming from attachment 2 in SIP 10. Here's a recommendation for spreadsheets or forms that show authorization, people authorized to use removable media, where it can be used, and it's all good stuff here. Again, and this is attachment 2. And then we have element 3.2 for malicious code mitigation that requires scanning of the removable media outside the BES cyber system. So before it's connected, before you use that removable media with a BES cyber asset or some other cyber asset within a network in an ESP, you're going to want to cause a scan of that removable media. And examples are provided in for element 3.2 in attachment 2, and that's what's reflected here in slide 32. Okay, I sort of whiz by the requirements and the examples of evidence because it's there. It's there for you to review, and there's really no need to read them to you. What I really wanted to do was introduce the subject to you, make you aware of what's coming down the line, get you prepared as quickly as possible with how you're going to address these issues with your vendors and contractors. You don't want to wait until the enforcement date for this requirement, because you're going to want your agreements with your contractors and vendors to already be in place and already have the necessary security controls that are required of your vendors and contractors. Lenny, do we have any questions?
We do. Let me bring up the first one here. What are the differences between the requirements for a transient cyber asset and requirements for BES cyber assets?
Alrighty. Well, let's talk about what kind of BES cyber system we're talking about and how our transient cyber assets can be used. So for a low impact BES cyber system, there is no applicability for SIP-10 requirement 4. So how should that transient cyber asset be used for a low impact BES cyber system? That's going to depend on your policy and your security plan for your low impact BES cyber systems. So at least for low impact BES cyber systems, I don't have an answer, other than it'll be dependent on the responsible entity's own policies and security plans for its low impact systems.
Okay. There's another.
Okay, and for the medium and high impact, all I can say in general is there's a lot more flexibility for a transient cyber asset than a BES cyber asset. The requirements in SIP-7 are not as flexible in comparison. The idea being for transient cyber assets, responsible entities should be able to manage those a little bit easier than a full-blown BES cyber asset.
All right. If a transient cyber asset is reconnected multiple times during the same 30-day period to a network within an EST, how often must the cybersecurity controls of the transient cyber asset be applied during the same 30-day period?
Okay, well, the answer to that, I'm going to go back to our management question, is the answer is here in section 1.1. So if you're managing the transient cyber asset in an ongoing manner, then there's your answer. As long as you're adhering to that policy and those procedures that implement that policy, it shouldn't matter whether or not you're connected. If connectivity is a trigger that for a security measure, that refers to an on-demand manner in applying the applicable requirements, then disconnection could be significant. It could, depending on what your plan requires, it could require going through your checklist again, going through perhaps a scan for by your antivirus software, I don't know. It depends on what you provide for in your on-demand requirements. Or you could have some sort of combination of both.
Okay. Another question, what is SIP exceptional circumstance where application of security controls under a plan for securing transient cyber assets would not apply?
Wow, that's a good question. A SIP exceptional circumstance is a term that's defined in the NERC glossary, and it's a new term that's used in connection with SIP version 5. So I would start with that definition. And let's see if I can find that definition. I don't have it at the tip of my fingers right now, but just to give an example, suppose you have a transient cyber asset that needs to be connected to your network within an ESP in connection with a cybersecurity incident. Maybe it's a forensic examiner who's coming in to and wants to image a hard drive, and will be using their forensic laptop or workstation for that purpose. That could very well be a transient cyber asset. There could be this immediacy that's at issue where there's a threat to reliability of your BES of the bulk electric system or the facility itself, and owing to this urgency, there may not be time to apply all the security controls that would ordinarily apply to a transient cyber asset. So that could be, depending on your policy, your organization's policy, that might meet the definition of a SIP exceptional circumstance and would excuse the application of the security controls for your transient cyber assets.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, sure.
If a transient cyber asset is inadvertently connected to the network within an ESP for more than 30 days, would such a violation qualify for NERC's FFT program?
Wow, that's a good question too. I'd have to say it depends, of course, but it sounds reasonable that find, fix, and track treatment could or should apply. And one reason why I indicate that is even though there's a medium risk factor violation associated with SIP 10 requirement 4, FERC just approved about a month ago in a new order that it would now permit NERC to use find, fix, and track treatment for moderate risk violations. So I definitely think that a responsible entity should be hopeful that find, fix, and track treatment would be afforded to a inadvertent violation, and you know, there's all the traditional elements that would apply to the find, fix, and track treatment. The most important probably being whether or not there were other mitigating factors that minimize potential risk to the reliability of the bulk electric system. So, the compliance history of the organization. So in sum, yes, I think find, fix, and track treatment could or should apply for an inadvertent error.
All right.
Well,
last question.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So
ahead.
this pertains to the frequency of scanning removable media. If we issue iron key USB drives to EMS support personnel, does it only need to be scanned at the time of issue?
So the answer here would be we'd be looking at the requirements for removable media in 3.1 and 3.2. That degree of specificity isn't in 3.1 or 3.2, so I'd have to say it's up to the responsible entity, but it does not seem reasonable to me to only scan the removable media upon issue, because it could change. And
furthermore, it's probably blank.
That's right. That's right. At that point, it's probably blank. That's right. So how often should you scan that removable media? Well, that would be in your plan. That would be in your plan, and the conditions for scanning.
Sounds like a best practice would be on some type of frequency.
Sounds good to me.
All right. I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Mark, thank you so much for this informative discussion. I'd like to thank all of our participants. Apologies for the technical difficulties there at the onset, and we appreciate your sticking with us. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye-bye.